Let's look at what a professor in Italy has to say about diversification.
The specialized companies is constituted by single business, vertically integrated and dominant business, and the diversified companies are companies which are present in a number of businesses or products which might be related and unrelated. So during the 1980s and 90s, after 74, this trend of increased diversification actually changed. All of a sudden, from 1970s, companies which had diversified in the last 25 years started to feel the pressure of handling such huge, complicated businesses. And that is why in the 1980s and 90s, the trend reversed as large companies refocused their core businesses. They started to diverse their non-core operations, non-core products, and started to have a more focused strategy. This chart gives you the same kind of figures, but for UK companies, and for pretty much the same time period, from 1950 onwards to a more closer time period, 1993. And what can be observed here is that diversification kept increasing till the 1990s, but if you pay great attention, it's the red bar which has mainly occupied the greater proportion of companies. So the companies which were diversifying mainly in related businesses. And the unrelated businesses also increased but occupied a smaller proportion of the overall companies in case of the UK market. And the single business enterprises, even till 1990s, we can see that it has been decreasing. So both in case of the US Fortune 500 and in case of UK corporations, what history tells us is that companies did see a merit in diversification. They did diversify into related and unrelated businesses, even though, as I said, towards the late 1980s and in the 1990s, there was a change in goals where companies started to refocus from growth as being the major driving force to shareholder value, of how to increase shareholder value. And that is where they saw a merit in not diversifying too much. That is where they saw a merit in kind of divesting some of the non-core business and refocusing.
Let's look at divestment as a strategic option. Possibly the option that we are considering involves moving out of a particular business, right? Now, let's look at some of the negatives of divestment. These are issues that we need to consider when we are planning to choose a divestment strategy. The first issue is the first negative. The first negative is that sometimes the exit barrier for divestment is too high. Okay? Now, what is exit barrier? The barrier that we need to cross in order to leave that industry. That is the exit barrier. There may be a financial exit barrier. For instance, if you are a bank, right, and you want to close down operations, then you will have to provide severance benefits to your entire host of employees, and you may have 50,000 employees, and you will have to provide severance benefits to them. So the financial costs of closure, of divestment, may be too high, or the government may react to your closing down a particular unit very negatively, okay? Or sometimes the market reacts to a particular business closing down very negatively. So exit barriers could be financial, could be government related, could be market related, but if the exit barrier is too high, then this is something which we need to keep in mind when we are deciding, when we are choosing a divestment strategic option. Another negative is the question of group history. Take Reliance. Okay. Now, Reliance, you will recall, started off with its Vimal fabrics, right, in the late 70s, early 80s, okay, and then moved into Vimal fabrics made from polyester, and then moved into making polyester, and then moved into refining oil to make the petrochemicals from which polyester is made, and then went into drilling for oil, right, from which petrochemicals, from which polyester, you know. So Reliance went in for a strategy of vertical integration, but it all started with Vimal fabrics, right. Now, today, if you look at the Reliance revenue, the bulk of its revenue comes from areas such as refining, petrochemicals, oil drilling, gas exploration, and so on. Very, very little comes from marketing products in the consumer area, okay, and this is no surprise, because a product like Vimal, for instance, which was a household name 30 years ago, today is all but forgotten. However, it plays a very important part in the history of the Reliance Group, and any strategy which involves divestment of Vimal is something which needs to be looked at several times on this count. Now, we've looked at the negatives of divestment as a strategic option. Now let's look at the positives of divestment as a strategic option. Now, not so much in India, but in the US, there are several business groups who specialize in buying and selling companies. Their expertise is in buying a company because they know that that company is undervalued, and once that company is with that business group for, let's say, 5 years, and once the business group changes its strategic parameters, the business does much better and the group is able to sell it off. Okay? So the expertise of the group is really in acquiring business units which are undervalued. Therefore, one positive of divestment is that for a group such as this, divestment is the use of their own expertise, okay, and therefore divestment is to be encouraged for a group such as this. Now, another issue is the issue of resource limitation. See, sometimes divestment is a good strategy because divestment will release cash, and sometimes the group finds that because of changes in ownership patterns within the groups, for instance, if you look at the groups like the Modis, right, there's been a division of assets within the group, and this division has left some group members with liquid assets and some group members with assets that are valuable but are not liquid. Okay, so therefore there is a strong rationale, there is a strong logic in some of these members attempting to improve their liquidity through divesting some of the units in order to raise cash. Another positive of divestment is a situation where there is market decline, right? For instance, a company manufacturing black and white TVs with picture tubes, the old TV. Now, a company such as this, if it is not planning to modernize into other kinds of TVs, then divestment is undoubtedly the best option for this company. So, divestment is a strategic option which has both positives and negatives, right? And these need to be balanced.